Bodybuilding has always been a sport of extreme limits. Crazy diets, brutal workouts, and a near superhuman level of commitment to aesthetics and performance. But how far is too far? In this video, we're diving into some of the saddest and most intense stories of athletes who, even in peak condition, couldn't beat the fight against their own limits. These aren't just tragedies that rocked the bodybuilding world. They sparked serious conversations about the risks behind chasing the perfect physique. Unlike other videos that talk about legends of the past or retired athletes who passed from natural causes, this one's different. Here, we're talking about bodybuilders who were still active, some just days or weeks away from stepping on the biggest stages in the world. Their deaths weren't just personal tragedies. They were warnings to the entire community. Because when the line between performance and survival disappears, what's really worth it in the end? Maybe the scariest part about these stories is this. All of them looked fine. They were in great shape, training hard, posting on social media, inspiring their followers. And out of nowhere, the news hits. Another body that looked too strong to be dead, but ended up too fragile to handle the invisible pressure. These losses exposed the dark side of high-level performance, where the body doesn't speak, it just obeys, until it breaks down. In this video, we're going to talk about 6 athletes who died while still living the competitive dream. These weren't random accidents or rare genetic conditions. These were collapses caused by extreme protocols, dangerous cycles, intense mental pressure, and a culture obsessed with pushing the limits of aesthetics. These deaths made headlines, left the community in mourning, and still fuel debates to this day. Bodybuilding didn't just lose muscle, it lost potential, champions, and human lives. So hit that like button, turn on the notifications, and drop a comment. Do you think bodybuilding is going too far? Had you heard any of these stories before? Your input means a lot. It helps us keep bringing real, raw, and unfiltered content about this world we love, but that sometimes asks for way too much in return. All right, enough talking. Let's get into the video. Picture an athlete just over 5 feet 3 inches tall, with a physique so dense, detailed, and jaw-dropping that he could intimidate true giants. That was Mohammad Benaziza, or simply Momo, as he was known in the bodybuilding world. He was like a miniature force of nature. And even without the typical height of a champion, his physique was so insane that he actually beat Dorian Yates, the guy who would go on to dominate the entire 1990s. That alone says a lot about the level he had reached. Benaziza stepped on stage looking like his body had been carved by hand. Ridiculous definition, crazy muscle density, and a stage presence that pulled all eyes to him. Today, he'd be the perfect fit for the 212 division, which rewards compact, refined physiques. But back in the 90s, that category didn't exist, and he still stood out among the biggest names. His win over Dorian in 1990 is still talked about as something almost unreal. The dark side? Behind that incredible body was a brutal prep routine. Not long after one of his shows, Momo passed away. The cause? Reportedly respiratory failure linked to extreme diuretic use, something that, sadly, is still common among athletes trying to get that paper-thin stage look. His death shocked everyone, especially because he seemed to be at his peak, both in career and conditioning. What hits hardest in cases like this is the illusion of control. When an athlete is winning, progressing, inspiring others, no one stops to think that their body might be seconds away from shutting down. With Benaziza, the collapse came fast and without mercy. It was like a star burning its brightest and suddenly going dark. The community was devastated, and his death became a silent warning. Even the best can fall. Momo's passing raised heavy questions. How much can the human body actually take? What's the real cost of chasing an extreme look year-round? And don't fans share some of the blame too, demanding physiques that are drier, denser, more unreal with each show? When the standards get impossible, the methods do too. And Benaziza became one of the first known victims of that more is never enough culture that took over bodybuilding. Newer fans might not know the name Mohammad Benaziza that well, but inside the sport, he's remembered as a legend. A technical, disciplined, and intense competitor who paved the way for future short kings in the game. And tragically, he paid the ultimate price for chasing greatness. His legacy still echoes as a reminder that performance and health have to go hand in hand, or the cost might be way too high. So tell me, had you ever heard of Momo? Did you know he was one of the few to ever beat the legendary Dorian Yates? Andreas Munzer was the definition of aesthetic perfection in bodybuilding. Every fiber, every muscle detail, every line was so sharp it looked like something out of CGI. But that unreal appearance came at a massive cost. Unlike most athletes, Andreas refused to ever be out of shape. For him, there was no such thing as an off-season. Being stage-ready 24/7 wasn't just a goal, it was an obsession. And that relentless pursuit of a perfect physique is what ultimately took his life. In 1996, Andreas competed at the San Francisco Pro and placed 7th. Not long after, he died tragically at just 31 years old. The cause? Internal bleeding during a flight, followed by complete organ failure. His autopsy revealed over 20 different substances in his system. Diuretics, stimulants, hormones, steroids, all at dangerously high levels. It was like his body had been chemically pushed to its absolute breaking point. The pressure Andreas put on himself was ruthless. Even when he wasn't competing, he wanted to look stage-ready for any photo shoot, appearance, or event. But the human body simply isn't built to stay shredded year-round. Staying dry, vascular, and peeled all the time means keeping your body in a constant state of stress, dehydration, and nutrient depletion. And as we've seen, looking perfect on the outside doesn't mean everything's fine on the inside. Munzer's death ripped the curtain off a brutal truth. The audience cheers for the stage physique, but rarely considers what's happening behind the scenes. How many drugs were used? How many sleepless nights? How many internal systems were silently shutting down? Andreas looked invincible in front of the cameras, but inside, he was already falling apart. His death was a brutal wake-up call to the sport, though sadly, not everyone listened. He became the symbol of an unreachable standard. The media praised him, fans worshipped him, and fellow athletes feared him. But no one stopped him. No one said, enough. In the end, he died alone with his own reflection, trapped in a cycle of image, validation, and drug dependence that's almost impossible to escape once you're under the spotlight. Today, a lot of people still look at Andreas Munzer's physique and call it one of the most aesthetic of all time. But few remember the pain behind the look. He never got the chance to grow old, to live beyond the stage, to build a life outside the mirror. His death was one of the saddest in the sport because it showed exactly what happens when aesthetics become more important than life itself. Do you think modern bodybuilding has learned from this story? Or are we just repeating the same mistakes with younger athletes? Drop a comment. The image might impress, but reflection is what really matters. Let's talk about it. Dallas McCarver was the kind of athlete who seemed born for greatness. In just 4 years, his physique exploded in a way that felt almost unreal, and he quickly became one of the biggest promises of his generation. He had size, symmetry, insane density, and a commanding stage presence. Everything judges and fans love to see. Still in his mid-20s, people were already calling him a future Mr. Olympia. But behind that meteoric rise, something else was quietly growing: risk. At just 26, Dallas was already sponsored, admired, and respected across the bodybuilding world. His physique looked straight out of a comic book. But what most people didn't see was the insane pressure he was putting on his body. Between 2013 and 2017, his transformation was so extreme that many started to wonder how his system was handling all. Sadly, the answer came too late. In August 2017, Dallas passed away suddenly, and the entire bodybuilding community was left stunned. Just a few months before his death, he competed at the Arnold Classic Australia. He fell ill during the event, but didn't seek proper medical help. That seemingly small decision may have changed everything. The body gives warning signs: pain, nausea, extreme fatigue, but in the middle of prep, many athletes ignore them. Asking for help is seen as weakness. And in Dallas's case, that mindset might have cost him his life. The autopsy revealed serious heart issues. Heavy hormone use, combined with extreme physical strain and his massive size, pushed his heart past the breaking point. It simply couldn't take it anymore. What hurts the most is that this probably could have been avoided. Dallas had the time, the resources, and access to doctors, but the push until you break culture was louder. And the result? A rising star gone before reaching his prime. Dallas's death sparked tough conversations about the pressure young athletes face. When someone rises too fast, expectations grow just as fast. The body becomes a machine, rest is labeled as laziness, and health gets pushed aside. Dallas didn't die just because he was huge. He died because he didn't have the time or the freedom to take care of himself properly. This tragedy also exposed a harsh truth about the role of sponsors, coaches, and the community itself. Are we pushing athletes to destroy themselves? Is support only there while the physique is picture perfect? Dallas was loved by many, but was he truly heard when it mattered most? These are hard questions, but they need to be asked if we want to stop more young talent from suffering the same fate. Luke Sandoe was charismatic, talented, and quickly rising through the ranks of professional bodybuilding. With a massive and detailed physique, he stood out on any stage he walked onto. He was seen as one of the UK's biggest hopes, and a real contender to take on the giants at Mr. Olympia. But in May 2020, while preparing for the show, the news no one wanted to hear broke. Luke had passed away. And what hit hardest wasn't just the loss itself. It was the haunting silence and the unanswered questions it left behind. Unlike other cases, Luke's death wasn't tied to physical collapse on stage or excessive use of substances. What people said, and still talk about, is the possibility of suicide. Close friends shared that he had been struggling with mental health issues, especially depression. However, his family denied that this was the cause of death, and the whole situation remained surrounded by mystery. The truth? We may never fully know, but what did come from it was an urgent and overdue conversation. For years, bodybuilding has promoted this image of invincibility. Giant men, carved out of sheer discipline, focus, and strength. But what happens when that body no longer reflects what's going on inside? Luke was well-liked, funny, active on social media, always showing up for interviews and podcasts. On the outside, everything seemed fine. On the inside, maybe not. And that right there shows how mental health is still such a taboo in this sport. The pressure to maintain a flawless physique, compete regularly, satisfy sponsors, and keep up a public image can be crushing. Now, imagine dealing with all that while also feeling emotionally lost or completely drained. So many athletes still feel ashamed to admit when they're struggling. Luke Sandoe may have been another victim of silence, a silence driven by a culture that praises appearance but forgets the soul. What makes his story even more heartbreaking is that he was still climbing. He wasn't a fading legend. He was just getting started, building a fan base, gaining respect, solidifying his place. He had so much ahead of him, but, as many have said, he also carried inner pain that few could truly see. That disconnect between external success and internal suffering is something that desperately needs more open discussion. If there's one takeaway from Luke Sandoe's death, it's this: the size of someone's physique doesn't define their emotional strength. We can admire the muscles, the poses, the trophies, but we can't forget the person behind it all. We need to make space for real conversations about mental health in bodybuilding. Not just when tragedy strikes, but every single day. Poloczek was a Polish bodybuilder based in Germany, known for his massive physique and quiet dedication. In 2022, he made his return to the stage, stepping up at the NPC Worldwide Championship in Germany. Right after the competition, still backstage, Paul suddenly fell ill. Just a few hours later, he was pronounced dead at age 37. The news shocked everyone. He had literally just finished doing what he loved most. His death was one of the most disturbing cases in recent years, mainly because it happened right after competition, with no visible warning signs. Paul had been training hard for this comeback after spending some time away from the sport. It was a meaningful moment for him. He looked great, was motivated, and hit the stage with the kind of fire you only see in someone who still has a lot to give. No one imagined it would be his final time under the lights. To this day, the official cause of death hasn't been released. That silence left room for speculation, especially among coaches and fellow athletes. Many believe it may have been linked to aggressive diuretic use and the extreme physical stress that comes with the final days of prep. Others suggest a silent heart condition, worsened by dehydration protocols. But with no report made public, everything remains a big question mark. Paul was known for being disciplined, calm, and low-key. He wasn't the type to stir drama or chase the spotlight. He focused on hard work, quiet improvement, the kind of guy who let his physique do the talking. That's why his death hit doubly hard. Not just because of the tragedy, but because it happened to someone who truly represented the more grounded, respectful side of the sport. He wasn't a media star, but he was a giant at what he did. His loss adds to the growing warning we've been sounding in this video. The risk is real, even when everything looks fine. An impressive physique and a solid routine don't guarantee safety. Pre-contest prep alone is harsh. When you add psychological pressure, water cutting, substance use, and the adrenaline of competing, it can push the body past the limit. Poloczek, sadly, paid that price with his life. The lack of official answers also adds to the frustration. Why do these deaths keep happening? Why don't we have mandatory international safety protocols backstage? If even experienced athletes like Paul are collapsing right after the show, maybe the issue isn't just individual. It might be systemic. Maybe the structure of the sport itself needs to change. George Peterson was known for his discipline, charisma, and flawless physique, always mentioned as one of the most consistent competitors in the game. But in 2021, something unthinkable happened. George passed away just one day before the official weigh-in for the Mr. Olympia. The news shook not just his fans, but the entire bodybuilding community. An athlete who was literally ready to step on stage was found dead in his hotel room. To this day, no official cause of death has been released. There's been speculation about diuretics or insulin, common substances used in the final prep phase, but nothing has been confirmed. The lack of a public report, combined with the family's silence, created an air of mystery around what really happened. And maybe that's what's most unsettling. No one saw it coming. George was one of the calmest, most balanced, and dedicated athletes on the circuit. The impact was so heavy that the entire Mr. Olympia weekend started under a dark cloud. Tributes were paid, tears were shed, but the feeling of emptiness lingered. How can someone who looks perfectly healthy, in peak condition, just die like that? Situations like this reveal how little we truly understand about the combined effects of the extremes athletes put their bodies through in those final days before a show. George was respected not just for his physique, but for who he was offstage. Always smiling, kind, and laser-focused. He wasn't into drama or controversy. On the contrary, he was the definition of professionalism and dedication. Maybe that's why his death hit so hard. If even the most careful athletes are at risk, what about those pushing the limits without consistent medical supervision? Another tough part is the silence that followed. With no cause disclosed, so many questions were left hanging. Would it help the sport if we knew what really happened? Absolutely. But it's also understandable that the family would want to protect their privacy. Still, that lack of transparency prevents the community from learning valuable lessons. Bodybuilding needs to face its own ghosts, openly and honestly. George Peterson was more than just an athlete. He was a symbol of effort, humility, and consistency. His sudden passing reminds us that even with all the appearance of strength and control, the human body has limits, and those limits can be crossed without warning. He left behind a powerful legacy, but also a silent warning that still echoes behind the Olympia stage. After hearing these stories, it's impossible to walk away unaffected. We're not talking about retired legends who passed with time. We're talking about athletes in their prime, deep in prep, with active contracts, hyped up fans, and clear goals. They were alive on stage, and just days later, they were gone. The line between glory and tragedy proved to be way too thin, and each of these losses is a muffled cry for attention, care, and change. These deaths force us to face some tough questions. How much can the human body really take? What are we asking from our idols? Is the perfect physique really worth more than a life? And maybe the most important one, are we taking care of athletes' mental and physical health with the same intensity we put into building their muscles? Bodybuilding is an amazing sport, but it can't keep ignoring the warning signs that keep repeating year after year. This isn't about demonizing the sport. It's about humanizing the people in it. These athletes aren't machines. They're men and women who love what they do, but who often find themselves trapped in dangerous standards and inhuman expectations. The go-till-you-drop mindset needs to make room for the take-care-of-yourself mindset. That's the only way bodybuilding can keep evolving without destroying the very people who build it with their own bodies. If this video hit you in any way, drop a like. It really helps the channel reach more people. If you're not subscribed yet, go ahead and hit that button and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our content. Here, we talk about real bodybuilding with respect, history, and behind-the-scenes truths that don't always make it to the spotlight. And if you want to go a step further, consider becoming a channel member. Your direct support helps us keep creating deeper content like this. And of course, I want to hear from you. Which of these stories impacted you the most? Do you think the sport needs to change? Have you ever stopped to think about how the backstage world affects these athletes, physically and mentally? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Let's open up real conversation and build a community that values bodybuilding not just for the aesthetics, but for the lives behind the physiques. I'll see you in the next video. Take care, respect your limits, and never forget, no trophy is worth more than your life. We're in this together.